Welcome, Kevin, to the World XP podcast. This is episode number 20. Kevin here is an old friend from when we were talking on the phone. I don't even know how long we've known
I was
each other.
thinking about it too. It's been so long that I don't even know where we met,
It's
but
been
we've known
quite
each
some
other
time. I think probably it has to have been maybe elementary school or maybe middle school. But Kevin is a video game developer now. He works for Hi-Rez Studios in a specific branch. Remind me of the branch.
I work for Evil Mojo, which is kind of
Mojo.
one of the game teams. Hi-Rez Studios is the umbrella, I guess you could say, publisher.
Sure, correct. So we're going to start with the hard questions. The age-old gamer question. Why didn't they fix that bug?
All right. We'll jump right into it. All right. So why didn't they fix that bug? So I guess I'll give a little bit of background into what I've done so far and kind of, what I do right now. And then we can dive into
Sure.
to my opinions on that question. So like you said, my name is Kevin. I go by Nico online, Neco. I am a game designer working on the game Paladins for Evil Mojo. And I have previous experience working as quality assurance. So I have a little bit of insight into that kind of question from the quality assurance side and a little bit from the game design side. So we can tackle the hard question right away. How did that bug get through? Why didn't they catch it? I can't believe that went live. They should have delayed the game, all that stuff. As I will probably frequently be saying throughout the course of this episode, it is more complicated than people realize. And I'll kind of start off with the basic, there's a lot of information that you wouldn't have unless you are on the other side of that question. And it's no fault of the people who are frustrated, because it is frustrating to expect a certain thing from a product and have those expectations not be met. But there are oftentimes a lot of information that just people don't have. So I have to speak in the broadest terms because that question can apply to any number of things, and the severity of any number of things varies. But why didn't they catch the bug? It could be, I'll just list off a couple options. It could be that they literally didn't have the manpower to do so. It could be they don't have enough QA, or there were things that were deemed more important to test, or their test plan wasn't comprehensive, which could be either a failure on QA's part or not even QA, because literally every part of the game development cycle should be looking at what they do. So it's not QA's fault that they didn't catch the bug that programmers reduced. It's also the programmer's fault. It's also everyone who's looked at the game, that kind of thing. It could be that they did catch the bug at some point, and the company or whoever is making decisions says essentially it is not worth it for us to fix that right now, either because there's something else that's game breaking that needs to be fixed with the resources they have, or it's going to take so long and they have to meet this deadline, like we have to get out before Christmas, or we promised we were going to get this patch out. It could be, that they literally just missed it. That does happen. And it could be that the nature of the issue is modified by other factors. So for instance, if there is something that doesn't happen in a public test environment, even with thousands of players, but may happen when 10,000 players log on at the same time, there's really realistically very small chance of actually catching that in a dev or public test environment.
Sure.
So sometimes that'll happen, and sometimes it'll manifest in different ways, and people will be like, I can't believe they didn't catch that. This happens every time I log in. But maybe it only happens every time you log in because there are thousands and thousands of other people also logging in. So I guess those are kind of the baseline potential answers that come to my head immediately, but obviously things become nuanced.
Yeah, for sure. So the example that is easiest for me to describe anyways, and we talked about this the other day, is using the example of FIFA and EA, because they're a huge company. So one of the things you mentioned, the sort of like the manpower and resources thing, you would think would sort of go out the window with a company like them. But that's not necessarily the case, depending on what the issue is and depending on the game mode and other sorts of things like that. But let's say the developers are working on a new patch from day one, and they're coding into an existing game. They have to make sure that, one, they don't break the rest of the game with something new, and two, that the new character, or in your case with Paladins, the new champion isn't so overpowered or OP. Um, and so they have to create this nice sort of balance. Given your experience kind of in that sort of situation, how difficult is it to kind of keep that balance? And then how can you describe sort of how you go about that from the developer side?
Sure. So when we create new things, I'll talk about champions specifically. Obviously, there's different types of content, different types of systems. But when we create new champions, part of what we want is to create something, and this is a mantra you'll hear from a lot of different people, a lot of different companies. I think Blizzard is probably the most famous for using this, is easy to learn, difficult to master. Mm-hmm. And I personally like to couple kind of that with something that is unique. I mean, obviously everyone will want something unique, but something that is unique to a particular experience or a particular way that people interact with the game is what I like to put into something new. So if we're creating a new champion, for instance, we could talk about the most recently released champion, Vora, who is a flank. Traditionally, that role would be played by a relatively easy to kill character, but one who has the ability to get in, do a lot of damage, get maybe an important pick or two on the other team, and then either die for their sins or be able to escape through some mechanism. Vora, it does something a little bit different. She is a flank, but most of her damage is delivered with a damage over time rather than flat damage. And that's a lot different than most people would traditionally feel for flanks and paladins. And a lot of her kit is also based around her passive, which provides a lot of sustain. She has a passive that she's able to get stacks when she hits things with her in-hand. And when she uses abilities, she consumes those stacks and is healed over time for each stack that is consumed, which is also a flavor, right? Everything's a flavor. So, for Vora, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and we're always striving to introduce something new with each champion that we do, because if it's just the same flavor of flank that we always have, then the game will get stale, and it's the same exact champion. So what we needed to do for Vora is we needed to introduce this mechanism, this damage over time mechanism, in a way that's not, as you said, not OP or not oppressive, but it's still interesting to play and is still effective to some degree. Mm-hmm. There were multiple iterations with her. I'll talk specifically about the damage over time component. There were multiple iterations with her. I played around with the difference in damage between the on hit, like the flat hit from getting hit by a projectile, versus how much damage was applied over time. I started off also increasing and decreasing the duration of the damage over time. So was this damage done over 1 second or like over 3 seconds? Mm-hmm. We found that it was extremely unsatisfying no matter how much damage was in the dot. I'll use dot as a shorthand for damage over time. Okay. No matter how much damage was done in the dot, if the flat damage was non-existent or very small, like let's say they have 1,000 health. If I hit them for 10 and then did 500 in the dot, it still wasn't as satisfying as having some amount of damage in the flat and then some amount in the dot. And that's a combination of people's familiarity with the types of damage that flanks already do, which is generally, like I said, burst, and the idea that, I expect this hit to do something, and when it doesn't do something, it feels wrong. Yeah. And a lot of times it's difficult for people to articulate that. It just doesn't feel satisfying. It feels wrong. So we played around a lot with that. We found that longer damage over time effects didn't feel satisfying either, because even if you were doing more damage, it was like tick, 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 and they're walking away, and it doesn't, like, I can't get the kill. They're getting healed or whatever. So we had to iterate on that, both in, like, from my side, like I was playing around in the editor alone, and then we also have dev side play tests. Mm-hmm. And that's even before we go to a public test server where people can give us feedback externally as well. But so for me, we played around with those different numbers. We kind of landed on a place that was okay. Some builds I would make her a little bit too strong just to see how that felt. Was it oppressive to play against? Make her a little bit too weak, see how that felt. Was it oppressive to play against? Was it fun to play? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how we wiggle our way into a general balance state with the understanding that we already have general ideas for what is okay. Like a 5-second stun feels like crap, regardless of who does it.
Yeah.
Or like in that 1,000 HP average example, if they have 10,000 HP, that's going to feel oppressive regardless.
Yeah,
So
for
within those
sure.
kind of generic bounds, you can play around with those numbers to find something that feels organic,
Hmm.
and feels familiar while also introducing something new. And yeah, and real speaking on something new real quick, there have been, I'm really proud of how Vora released. I think she's fairly balanced as far as things go. But there were, and some people absolutely love her, and some people absolutely don't like her because they view her as recycled content from other champions, which is kind of interesting.
Mm.
We have a projectile that is similar to another champion, so obviously it is, the same as that champion. We have a modified version of, there's another champion who has a vine pull, so we modified that to more of an impulse swing, but people of course said you literally just copied this other ability. And so kind of that dichotomy between, can we introduce something that's familiar,
Hmm.
but not so familiar that people will rage that it's exactly the same as something else, even if it isn't, and can we introduce something that's new that feels different to play, but not outlandish, I guess. That's kind of a
Sure.
long-winded answer for how do you balance things, but when creating new stuff, that's kind of the general process we go through.
No, it's a good one. And real quick before we move on, I feel like obviously I think we'll be talking about Paladins quite a bit. Do you want to just go through a quick sort of summary of what the game is for those who don't know or aren't familiar with it?
I think that's a great idea. So Paladins is a hero shooter. It occupies the genre with probably the two other games you would most likely have heard of are Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 are also hero shooters. They're typically characterized by small-sided matches, 5 to Team Fortress 2 up to 9
Hmm.
competitively, with different characters or different champions or heroes or however you want to call them. They each have their own identity, and they usually each have their own either statistics, abilities, which we call like an ability kit, is a set of all of the abilities,
Hmm.
or both. And so a champion might have a set HP and 5 abilities, and those abilities are, they're the only ones who can use those abilities, and that becomes who that champion is. And then usually there's, you vie for control. It's a control point or a payload or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's the general gist of it. Uh, so, and they can they're usually either first or third person. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Sounds good. I think that's a pretty succinct and accurate summary. I think from here on out, I think most people will understand. If you don't, Google it.
Yeah.
um, but kind of, I want to touch on with the balance thing real quick. When you have that sort of code for people who aren't sort of familiar with software development, when you're coding into the game a new champion or a new ability or something like that, how delicate is it to make sure that that gets into the game properly without breaking something else or keeping the status quo of the rest of the game sort of at least recognizable to the player base? So like you said before, there's not people raging about, oh, you broke this, or why did you not get this, or et cetera, et cetera.
That's a good question. I'll preface this answer with a bit of a caveat that I don't do too much literal coding myself. I work with the programmers. I do a little bit of scripting and a little bit of SQL, which is more database management.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm familiar and I work closely with the programmers, so I think I can answer some of this question at least.
Sure.
Um, part of it is maintenance of code, which I think plagues a lot of software development in general. Paladins in particular, in its earlier stages, was very much focused on getting to market and making sure that we were able to iterate and pump out content very quickly, which unfortunately leads to something else that is sometimes commonplace and is a bit of a pitfall for software development. The idea of spaghetti code or legacy code,
Mm-hmm.
or any code that was built quickly without foresight for sustainability later, can often lead to problems down the road if you expand or even touch those systems.
Mm.
So for example, we have one champion, Terminus. His ultimate allows him to come back from the dead, essentially. He dies. If he has his ult charged, he can press a button and he'll come back to life in an explosion. That introduced a huge number of problems. And because of the way that we work with the HP of the champions and the way that we, he's already dead. How does it work with executes? How does it work with cauterize, which prevents healing?
Mm-hmm.
Like all that stuff. And every time we try to go back and tweak him, something else breaks with him because of the nature of, code can be interconnected in such a way that there, if you change something, especially, and obviously, the argument could be that good code maintenance means that you don't reference other things, or that systems are mostly compartmentalized, but it can be more difficult than that, right? Like obviously
Sure.
pie in the sky, everything works separately, but
Mm-hmm.
based on a solid code base. But there are things, if you change or you tweak, that are linked to something else, either directly or through whatever software that you use to do the game, for example, like the way that the game engine works.
Mm-hmm.
So if you touch that, then something else that is somehow linked to that also breaks or changes. And so essentially you're building on an unstable foundation a lot of the time with the legacy code.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, probably where most of that comes in. There are also instances, I'm sure, of whatever changes or fixes are made just being poorly implemented. And that could be they don't have enough time to do it properly. That could be they didn't even think about doing it a different way. They just like, well, yeah, I'm sure that'll work. And maybe it does work. But as you mentioned, it may then break something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say those are probably the two big ones.
So when the developers sort of finish going through their initial sort of build out, and then it goes to sort of the first round of testing, or like the internal QA stuff, what I feel like from our conversation earlier and from just my general understanding of how people think that the video game industry works, that being a QA is just you get to play the video game all day. But
I've heard that.
Yeah. So can you sort of go through like the process of, okay, you get the first build out from the developers, you test it, obviously, so there's some of playing the game, but then sort of what goes into the test? What sort of things are you looking for, and how do you give that feedback back to the developers?
Sure. So we use a system called Jira. First, I'll answer the last part first. We use a system called Jira to create and track issues. So we call them, you call them Jiras or bugs or tickets or whatever. As far as the actual testing goes, and it ties into like software development cycles and, the idea of agile development or Scrum-based development versus waterfall versus, other types of production, essentially, for software development. But okay, so we have essentially a branch. We're going a little bit into like version control, I guess. We have a main branch that is kind of ongoing, and as things are done, whether it's a new champion, a new skin, a new whatever piece of content, that is submitted and integrated into the main branch. So in dev, if we have a stub out for a new champion, most of it will probably not be functional. And then as they do different devices, they'll plug them in and have them show up in the next build. Testing a specific piece of content or a specific champion can be done in a variety of ways. We don't jump straight into playtesting, for example. The very first blockouts for a new champion or a new piece of content can be done locally. So speaking from experience in QA, if there's something new that's in, I can go and take a look at it on my own time and say, okay, very first look, what's broken, what's likely to break, is it even functional at all? Like just basic stuff.
Sure.
We also take that time to plan ahead. We can create a test schedule based on the design documentation that we've been given. So if it's a new champion, the designer may say, hey, this is the general idea for these abilities. We'll obviously pivot as we need to, but I expect it to do this. I expect, approximately this much damage, approximately this much reload time. And as they get in, we're able to go and take a look and check them off and say, this is looking okay, this is not looking okay. If something is wrong with any system, we'll go ahead and we'll create a ticket for it. the biggest thing for us, and something that a lot of people, a lot of people report issues in the game. My textures are missing. Like, yes, that sucks. That's really, actually, it can be really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest thing for us is making sure that we can reproduce the issue, because the more documentation we have about how to reproduce the issue, the easier it will be to find the breaking point. So if somebody says my textures are missing, that could be any number of things. And while, yes, it's bad that your textures are missing, if you say, every time I change my world settings from high to medium, every single time, my textures break. That makes it really easy for us to go in and do the exact same thing and say, okay, it's obviously something from switch, we're able to reproduce it. It happens when you switch from there to there, and our programmers or whoever takes care of it can say, okay, how do we fix this? As far as like play testing goes, I have heard, it's funny that you mentioned that, I have heard very much, oh, you work in games. That means, you test games or you design games. It means you play games all day and get paid for it. That would be nice, but no, not quite. A lot of it goes into, we do have play tests. We have scheduled play tests. If we have a new champion coming, like, hey, they're using a model they're using temp art and temp model and temp sounds, but let's get a play test going, see how she or he, or, whichever champion we're coming up with, feels with playing it, even in a stubbed out state, playing with the other champions.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a targeted play test. Hey, we are testing this interaction. We are testing this change. We are testing this new champion. We also occasionally have general play tests just to make sure, like every few patches, we want to make sure we run through all the champions, make sure they're still all selectable and not broken and everything like that. It's just trying to general sanity check. And then, as I mentioned before, kind of the spot checking or the more individual testing can be done either in small teams, 2 or 3 QA members testing a specific system, or specific QA members who are going off of the test plan that we have, writing up any issues, sending them off to whichever team is most appropriate to check it. Hopefully those issues get fixed, and then, we get them back as QA and say, was the issue addressed? And do we think there are any other outliers that could arise from how they fixed it?
Sure. That makes sense. It's funny you mentioned reproducing of bugs. I think in my old job, I was doing systems analyst work, and a big part of it was test and evaluation of different equipment for the military. And when we would test the new stuff, reproducing some of those things was always the hardest part, because we would have, what we would do is called environmental testing. So we'd put it in a chamber and we'd run it through like high temperature, low temperature, wind, altitude, like all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'd get something that would break, and because we didn't have ample spares often enough because of budgets and other things, it was hard to find exactly what broke the thing, because you'd leave it in the chamber for 24 hours at a super high temperature, and you don't know when it broke, you don't know where it broke, you don't know exactly what part of it broke.
Right, just so that it no longer works.
Exactly. And so when you'd write the test report and send it up the chain, you'd be like, hey, it broke when we did this long test, but that's it. And so I'd imagine for you guys, there's probably some obscure bugs that are extremely hard to reproduce. I think you mentioned one when we were talking last time. I think it had to do with turrets.
I did.
Do you want to go into that a little bit?
I would love to. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite stories about my time as quality assurance. So at the time, I was working on Smite, which is not my like Evil Mojo's game. It's Titan Forge's game, which is another subsidiary or game studio within Hi-Rez. They do. It's a MOBA, and other games in the same genre include like Dota, Defense of the Ancients, and League of Legends.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the 2 most popular in the genre. So for this issue, and part of what we as QA do, although it can wear on you, is we interact with the community.
I'm sure that's fun.
I guess the way I would put it is that people who are passionate about the games they play can have that passion. I'm going to say like leak through, I suppose, in their interactions with the community and the game developers. But so that was the first thing I learned, actually, was how to deal with people online, essentially. They don't even have a QA team. How did they miss this? But this issue in particular, we were getting reports that Vulcan, who puts down a turret, that his turret was invisible, completely invisible. And we couldn't figure it out because in every environment we went into, his turret was right there. It was visible. It was like there was no issues. And we tested multiple different ways. And we said, okay, well, maybe this report, maybe something else is going on. We can't really, I don't have the time. I can't spend 2 days testing this turret when we have other content that we do have to put in the game. But we kept over time hearing different reports that his turret was invisible. His turret was invisible. It's really a problem. And at some point we're like, okay, so what do we got to do to figure out why his turret is invisible? And somebody mentioned that most of the reports seem to be from Spanish-speaking users, which we thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. Because why are English-speaking or German-speaking or French-speaking or whatever users not reporting the same issue? So at that point, I was the one who actually ended up finding the issue, which was kind of cool. But at that point, we started looking at different things. Like, okay, so maybe it's something to do with Spanish or whatever. So I went through all the languages, and I went at the time I was trying to think, what could it possibly be? So I decided I would go through all the languages on every map and at every level of the ability. There are like 4 or 5 levels of the ability. Does it show up? So I switched to, or I went through all the languages actually, but I switched to French, switched to German. Like level 1, drop the turret. Level 2, drop the turret. Level 3, drop the turret on every single map that we had. And as it turns out, on the Joust map, in Spanish and Portuguese only, at level 1 only, the turret was invisible. So not at level 2, not in French, not on any other map, but that specific map, that specific 2 languages, and that specific level of the ability, the turret was invisible. And that was mind-blowing because, like, in my head, I'm thinking, like, how could that happen? But of course, we've talked about how complicated and convoluted these things can be. It could be any number of things. I believe it was an incorrect resource string in the Spanish and Portuguese language pack that was being imported on that map and was causing the texture to fail to load, which is just absolutely wild to me. But so we ended up finding that issue. We fixed it and didn't get any thank yous because, like, that's the way it should be. Yeah, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. But I think that's my favorite bug so far. It's just how specific is that, right?
Yeah, it kind of just goes to show how like complex the coding actually is, that it could break just that one little thing. And it's also one of the reasons why didn't they catch that? It's because who would have caught that? It's like I think probably when you're going through the testing, it's like you don't have the time to do that. I think probably. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's very accurate. I mean, there are only so many things that we can test in a certain amount of time. So, at the time, I did go through every language in the game. I would launch the game in every language. I would play like a practice match in the language. But I don't have time to go through. There are over 120 gods at this point in Smite. I don't have time to go through every rank of every ability of 120 gods on every map in every language.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It goes back to sort of like the resources and the manpower that you were mentioning earlier, but I think there was a stat that you mentioned, I think when we were talking the other day, that like there's more gameplay hours in the first day of game release than there will be done like for all of testing.
On any semi-popular game, as soon as it's released, like within the first day, like I said, there will be more man hours of gameplay interacting with the code and the game than is feasible for any company to do within the development cycle, just because of the nature of so many eyes and so many different interactions versus the size of the dev team and the testing team. And that's where you often hear those day one bugs of like, how couldn't they catch this? Well, it happens it happened specifically because there were, 50,000 people who were doing the same exact thing, and it broke in a very specific set of circumstances, kind of thing.
Yeah, there was my old roommate in college in GTA 4 or 5. On one specific part of the map, you could swim into the water and go under like a bridge or something like that. But as soon as you went under it, you would pop up like under the ground, and you could just run under the ground and go shoot people from below, and they couldn't see, like they didn't know where it was coming from, and you could just do that, and it was only you had to go on like this one specific part of the bridge, and like you probably know those people that just look for those things to mess with, like whether it's like shortcuts or little glitches here and there. I remember one time when I was little, I was playing Mario Kart with my little brother. We were on Rainbow Road, and he fell off at some point during the race, and it put him a lap ahead in first place. He went from last to first, and we tried for weeks to find that spot where he fell off, and we couldn't find it.
for not only for like the gameplay content stuff, but also for the bug stuff, I have something like shadow play running most times at this point, so that if something wild happens, it can be like, all right, go back, clip that kind of thing, because that, like, breaking the game intentionally or accidentally, I think is really interesting and really fun.
Yeah, although it was GameCube, so couldn't really do shadow play.
That's true.
But even so, it's just like there's all sorts of people that like that'll just try for hours and hours and hours to find random little things that, like, you guys in the testing world, or well, when you were in QA, well, you still do testing now, I think, right?
I mean, I look at all of the stuff that I put in myself.
Yeah, but like the time that it would take you to find all those little things is just not feasible. Like, if you were working on Mario Kart, it would not be feasible for you to spend 3 weeks to find that one spot that, like, in all the times that we played, like we played a lot, and we only found that spot one time,
right,
by accident.
Now imagine and then also just even think about spending, even if your boss told you, hey, I need you to do this for a month. Can you imagine spending a month for 9 to 5 every single weekday just running off the map, like from here and then here and then here and then here? Like, horrible. It would be,
you would lose track. You'd lose track of where you did it, and like it could have even been oh, it's based on you were on the second lap instead of the first lap, or like some random wacky thing. Also, it's wild that that sort of issue goes all the way back to like GameCube, which wasn't even an online platform. You'd think the games would probably be simpler.
Simple doesn't necessarily mean less complicated. Well, I mean, I guess technically it means less complicated, but simple doesn't necessarily foolproof it,
No, definitely not. Well, yeah, dude, I couldn't imagine boss being like, hey, I need you to play Rainbow Road every day for a month. It's probably, his boss would probably be like, why are you wasting this manpower on that?
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, they have to run the business and they have to generate a profit. And so something is not, if there's only some small portion of the community, of that gaming community, that is experiencing that, like, for example, the turret thing, in another game, like if something like that happened in FIFA, where like only one small section of the user base was experiencing this one thing, they'd be like, yeah, we're working on it. And it wouldn't get fixed for like, who knows how long. Probably wouldn't get fixed until close to when the next game was released, but then they would probably be like, no, we're working on the next game, so we're still not going to fix it. And then that's very frustrating as a consumer.
Definitely.
Which I'm sure you've experienced, being in the community, interacting with the community, which I don't envy that at all. I've seen horrible things tweeted at the EA guys. I've seen horrible things said in the comments sections and all sorts. So I couldn't really imagine what it would be like to be on the receiving end of all that for more than like 2 days, to be honest. But
it was one of the first things I had to learn, or I was going to go insane, was how to deal with people who are passionately expressing opinions without the information they need to make an informed statement on it. And a lot of it is that we, even as names on the internet, they can yell at the name because it represents the company and their frustration without realizing that that person is a person. I've seen some of the worst things I've ever seen said to people, said online or to developers, not even necessarily just us, but just in general. You know, calling for people's jobs, like whoever designed this, whoever didn't catch this, whoever broke this deserves to be fired. They're obviously bad at their job. We even at some point had a couple of police officers outside our studio because somebody had called threatening to come and do physical harm to our devs. Nothing came of it, but like that kind of thing happens, and it's super. It's not even. It's beyond frustrating. It's super disheartening because at the core of it, I know for a fact that my team, and I think it's true for most teams, want to do right by their work and by their community. So for us to like be shiny and bright and like put yourselves out there, like, yes, I did this thing. Aren't you excited? It's gonna be fun. And then like, yeah, it's kind of cool, but this broke and that sucks and I hate that. And it can beat you down, but you learn to pick the things that are, you know, somebody, for me at least personally, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, this champion you created, I love them. So this aspect is so cool. That'll shield me from 50, like, oh my God, this is the dumbest champ ever from other people. So
yeah, I feel sort of the same way about the podcast. Not that I get any hate for this, but just like if one person texts me like, oh, like I learned something from this clip or this episode, I'm like, cool. That's what you do it for. That's
what it's for. Yeah,
that's what you do it for. So and that was kind of the whole premise in the first place, was when the guys in the first episode, Sammy and Izzy, were like, hey man, I think people would really like your ideas. I was like, we'll see.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And so here we are 20 episodes later. But yeah, dude, like how long did it take for you to sort of get a handle on that sort of interaction? And then two, how has it helped you in like the rest of your life, not like offline?
So it took me at least a couple months to really kind of nail it down. I would get super disheartened when there was something that I saw as a failure that was then like hounded on by the community. Like, how could you miss this bug? Oh, maybe I did miss this bug. Could I have caught it? Could I have done better? Like that kind of thing. So it took me a couple months, and I still sometimes struggle. Like I have good weeks and bad weeks where, you know, I'll go on the comments, which you really shouldn't do.
No.
Go to Reddit or go on the comments in the YouTube video, and they're all like this, that, or the other. And I'm like, well, darn, maybe I am trash.
Never go to the comment sections.
Yeah, for real. But for the most part, I've learned to approach it much more elegantly. To the second part of your question, which I just forgot, but we just talked about it. It was, I'm sorry, could you refresh me?
It was just sort of like, have you noticed a change in how you deal with life outside of the gaming sort of world, having dealt with these sorts of interactions before?
Yes. It's actually been, and this kind of links to a game design principle as well. So a very, very important part of being a game designer is giving, but also learning how to receive and parse feedback. Most people, and through no fault of their own, do not give feedback well. There is a lot of, it is absolutely. There is a lot of, I hate this. This feels wrong. This is OP. This talent is crap. Stuff like that. And what you as a designer need to learn to do is to ask follow-up questions as applicable if they're not going to bite your head off, right? If it's an offhand comment, you have to realize that they're not attacking you personally. Like it's not your personal work. They're like, you, Kevin, did bad work. It's a knee-jerk reaction to, I don't like this aspect of the game, and I didn't realize that, you know, somebody had put effort into this kind of thing. So you need to be able to ask those follow-up questions and really kind of dig into why and what they're thinking. So this talent, or, you know, this champion is crap, or this ability, let's go with like, this ability sucks. I'll never use it. It could be any number of things, right? It could be, they don't think it does enough damage. it puts them, it doesn't feel satisfying to use. And then some people, you know, it feels something's wrong. I can't put a name on it. Something's wrong. It could be, you don't have any tactile feedback. So if you're using a controller, for example, if you fire and there's no like rumble, something's wrong, but they can't say, oh, there's no rumble. It's just something's wrong. Doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So being able to follow up on that and to parse information from that kind of feedback is extremely important. And I kind of hearken that to another life skill that I picked up from having worked in a grocery store, actually. Or it's the same thing with retail, but it wasn't until I worked in a grocery store, where you work in retail, that you learn, in my opinion, to like feel a little bit of empathy for the people who have been in that position.
Yeah.
So the idea, so being yelled at on the internet, I wasn't in the habit of yelling at people on the internet beforehand, but it's given me a greater understanding of how to approach things that I'm passionate about. If I'm frustrated about something, it's even more, after having had these experiences, it's even more important for me to analyze my frustrations, to say, this is why I feel frustrated. What's the most appropriate, best way to either deal with that frustration or to give the feedback as appropriate, rather than going on Twitter and saying like, your game's trash, your servers are down. Not, you know, that's
All
just,
caps.
that's the, exactly, all caps, like, that's just an example, but I would say definitely that having dealt with people being aggravated or frustrated towards the dev team or me has helped kind of crystallize that Zen, how I approach feedback as a game designer and how I approach my own feelings when I feel frustrated.
That's good, man. That's good. It's a lot of, you could also say the same thing for working in like as a waiter or a waitress. The same sorts of, oh, you forgot my ranch.
Right.
Like,
it's like, you're not going to die. Like, I'll go get your ranch. Like, calm down.
It's the same. It's almost the same sort of principles. Like, you missed this bug. You forgot my one thing. Yeah. And like you said, I know tons of people that like, after working in blank insert industry, service industry with where you interact with lots of people, now are like, oh, I didn't realize blank,
right,
or I didn't realize this or that. And oftentimes they come out of it with sort of similar experiences to you, where you're like, oh, it helped me in my day-to-day life as well. And that's really cool. It's like it's a cool sort of growth pattern, especially once you realize it as like you, the individual, you realize it, you kind of feel like you got somewhere.
It's a learned skill to develop that empathy and recognize that other people and their time and their thoughts have value. You don't need to be best buddies with everyone, but
Sure.
it doesn't take a lot of energy to not be a dick.
Yeah.
To them, you know,
Exactly.
like, to put it simply.
So does that help with like the feedback that you guys give each other on the dev team? Is it you guys try and all make it like as constructive as possible?
I try to gently remind team members when they do give feedback that is not given as constructively as possible, that there are better or different ways to do it. But I also understand, like I said before, that if they give negative knee-jerk feedback, it's not a personal attack. It's literally just their opinion on a certain thing. Another thing that we learn in design very quickly, at least from my experience, is that you need to be, I think the phrase we use is, you need to be ready to kill your children. So you can put a lot of effort into like, this is a fantastic game design document. This is the best thing I've ever designed. There's no way people don't like this. And when we go and we talk with the rest of the design team or the rest of the team, and they say, I don't know, it doesn't seem fun, I don't think I'm going to like it. You need to be ready to say, okay, can I scavenge anything from this? If not, it's dead, and we move on to the next thing. Yeah. And that can be difficult for a lot of people, because when you put so much time into something, it's difficult to kill it.
Oh, for sure.
But that kind of goes hand in hand with that feedback thing. So if somebody gives me feedback, you know, I really appreciate when they say, I felt very strong in this instance. I think it was because of all the damage that I was doing with this ability. I think it feels a little bit stronger than I would have thought. is an example of decent feedback.
Yeah.
I felt, and this is why I think why, versus I think you need to reduce the damage. Actually, so that's the, that's the other thing. That's one of my favorites is, the first inclination is for people to give me what I should do to fix it in their eyes, which is not particularly useful. It can be useful to say, hey, I think maybe we can take a look at this aspect of this ability, but to say this ability is too strong, just reduce the damage. That's all you need to do, and it's fixed. In different flavors of that, it happens all the time.
I'm sure. And people think it's more constructive as well than not. Well, it is more constructive than just being like, oh, this thing sucks. But at the same time, without them understanding how complex the code actually is, it doesn't really help you too much, other than it gives you a more specific sort of gripe that they have with the game.
Right. And I will never say that people's opinions are invalid or unworthy of being heard.
Sure.
Or say that my experience as a game designer like inherently makes what I say superior to other people, because that's not true. I just happen to have a certain skill set that allows me to approach things differently. But it can be difficult for some people, I think, when they are firmly set, like this is the thing they have to do. Like everything would be solved if they just did this.
Yeah.
And have that be told to somebody, and then have to be told that something prevents that from happening, or that they disagree and are not going to be doing that. It's like, well, if I were just in charge, we would just do this and it would be fixed.
Yeah. It happens at work often. Like you said, the killing the children thing. It happened at my job often as well. It was another skill that I had to learn. Would work for X number of hours on such and such document, and we're not actually going to go that way. We're going to go a different direction. What?
All this time wasted.
Yeah.
But
I could have been doing
you know,
other things, but then like you take a step back and you're like, well, at least I learned how to write blank document. And then like that's the thing you have to take out of it, because if you don't take that thing out of it, you're going to go crazy.
It's well put.
Yeah, but you mentioned reducing damage, and so I want to touch on sort of so going back to FIFA, there's like obviously the different players have different stats, and then in like you know the game Age of Empires 2?
I do.
Yeah,
what a fantastic RTS.
That's one of my favorite games probably of all time. So obviously the characters or the units have different hit points, and then they do different like number like of damage.
Right.
And then the different bonuses, you can get like a +1 on archer damage with such and such bonus. How simple is it? And I know we talked when we were talking the other day, your champions don't really have that sort of number bonus, but how would you go about sort of adjusting the damage like in the back end? You say, okay, well, this thing does too much damage, so we need to tweak blank. Is it better to tweak the damage, or is it better to up the armor on the other guy? Like, how do you sort of go about doing that?
So that can be a very complicated process, and that's part of what we do as a team, a design team, is try to determine the best way or the most elegant way to go about something like that. The simplest answer would be, if we feel something is too strong, then we reduce the damage number. And that is the simplest answer, but I would argue that it is often not the best answer. But it is also the type of answer that we often get from those people I was discussing before. Just reduce the damage. That's all you need to do. The way that we try to look at it is in the same way that we try to gather and give feedback. What do we think is potentially the issue here? Is it that this specific champion is doing too much damage? Is it that in a certain matchup with another champion, the other champion is taking too much damage? Is this ability too strong when viewed in conjunction with the rest of their kit? Is it too strong alone? Are there ways that we can address the issue that we think we see without changing a number, for instance, or without changing something as simple, although simple doesn't mean not impactful, just simple, as damage. For instance, we recently changed one of our snipers to have his sniper rifle fire, we increased the post fire on his sniper rifle, which means that there's more time after a shot before he can shoot again.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to go that way because we felt that he was able to utilize his sniper rifle essentially too quickly. He was shooting too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than reduce his damage, or rather than like reduce the some other aspect of the weapon, we decided to change it so that instead of nerfing the damage itself, because part of the player fantasy as a sniper is that high damage single shot, one kill vibe.
Yeah.
Just put those shots out less frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to determine where we think the problem is and potential solutions that are addressing the problem without taking away from the fun of the game is a huge part of what we do for something like that.
Definitely. I think Age of Empires does a really good job, given that the game is as old as it is. I think it's 21 years old now, of balancing those different sorts of solutions like you were talking about. Like I remember in one patch, they would reduce the rate of, I think the English longbows, they would reduce the rate of fire for them. Instead of making them -1 damage, they would reduce the rate of fire just a little bit. And that would sort of balance it out, because they have to balance it out with their civilization, but also all the other civilizations in the game. And then as they added more and more, they had to make them unique enough that people would want to use them, and they weren't just copycats like you mentioned earlier, but also that they were balanced enough in the game. And I think in the definitive edition that they released a year ago, maybe, the remastered one, I don't think there is every civilization is strong on a different map. And that is something to me that's extraordinary, because you always have, in almost every game I've ever played, you always have, this civilization is better than the other ones, pretty much regardless of the map. And this one is worse than the other ones. Like the Saracens used to be horrible. But then when they remastered it, they upped the hit points of their camels, the special units, and upped the rate of, it was like the throwing axe camels, and they upped the rate of fire just a little bit. And like all of a sudden they were usable, and they didn't just get mowed down by whoever.
So what you just said touches on, I think, I had three ideas as you were talking.
Go for it.
One that I love how you talk about the different aspects of upgrades, right? And they do different things. So let's take those camels, for instance. Increasing their HP means that they're tankier. Increasing their movement speed, which would mean that they're also tankier, but in a different way. They're more evasive. Increasing their rate of fire increases the damage. Increasing the damage increases the damage. Increases like armor pen, if that were a thing, increases the damage. That or bonus damage against a certain type of unit is a more specific type of that. So there's so many types of ways to approach balance that is kind of the how you do that. I love that you said that there's a civilization that's strong on each map, because that touches, I think, on something that's rather fun, rather important about the idea of balance. People often say that a balanced game is a perfect game, or whatever. That I just want the game to be balanced. I just want it to be balanced. But I think it's a really healthy thing for certain circumstances to benefit certain things. So certain champions, certain civilizations, certain units. Even something as simple as like pikemen counter horses, and archers counter pikemen, and so horses counter archers. Like that idea that there are things that are more effective in certain circumstances, like builds up the potential for different interesting, unique interactions between different gameplay systems. And the third thought I had was that part of a live service game in particular, but balance in general, is encouraging new and different things. And that could be through a variety of ways. It could be nerfing or buffing. It could be introducing new things. But like a balanced game that has no changes ever will become stale. If changes are made, oftentimes, especially a live service game, if changes are made that allow new and different ways to play the game while still remaining, within that variance that people think is balanced, I think that's really the way that, that we can go about it. And to hear that, they buff or nerf certain civilizations or certain units to provide, in certain sets of circumstances, they're strong or they're weak, they change that in different ways, but it allows certain things to shine in certain places. And then that's where like the skill comes in, is being able to manipulate those sets of circumstances in a way that works for you. I think that's really a
Exactly.
fun part of the game.
Exactly. It's like almost like the rock paper scissors scenario that you mentioned with the archers, the pikemen, and the horses, the cavalry. That's basically what it is. But you have to know when to use those different things to your advantage. One of the other things that they do that's really cool is, you're talking about the easy to learn, hard to master concept. Age of Empires is a very good example of that, because there are certain civilizations where if you just make their unique unit and you're playing against somebody that doesn't know how to play, you'll kill them. But
It was me on the Teutons.
yeah, exactly.
Just get the knights.
Exactly. They're so tanky and they're so hard to kill. But if you have a fast, mobile, like the Mongols, for example, with the cavalry archers, and you can just shoot and run and shoot and run, and then the knights that you're talking about will never get to them.
Right, they're too slow.
If you're exactly, and so that's the balance of that unit, that they're slow. And then another thing that they do, they'll have like fishing bonuses for different like civilizations. So on water maps, some like the Vikings are better on water than they are on land, but they're not bad enough on land that they're unusable. And so when you go into these tournaments where like these pro guys play, you'll see all sorts of variations of strategies and styles, and people using different civilizations and trying different things. And some civilizations advance through the ages faster, but once they get to the imperial age, they're not as strong, and some advance slower, but once they get to the imperial age, they're stronger. And so it's like, can you get to the imperial age before the other one? And then it's a whole thing. It's really interesting to me to like watch those guys play, because they're so good, and they like know they've got the mastery down. And it's really cool to see them manipulate all the different balancing aspects and how they kind of interact, but also how well they balanced it out, because there's not one like they use the advantages like almost to perfection, but they're countered by other advantages that are also being used to perfection. And it's so cool to watch those matches happen, like whether they're streamed or on YouTube or whatever.
I love talking about different layers of skill. I've talked about it multiple times to my friends about Team Fortress 2 sniping, for instance. But the idea, kind of to your point, that once you have a basic understanding of how the game works, then you unlock the like how best to use certain things. And then it's like, I know how best to use certain things. Now I have to use those certain things when I know the other person also knows how to use their things properly. This whole mind, it could be anything, a whole mind game. The idea of, as you mentioned, the Viking centric maps, like maybe one team, okay, this is a Viking map. Are they going to play Vikings? Does that mean that I can pick something that I know counters Vikings specifically for this instance? What if they don't play Vikings because they know that I know they're playing Vikings? Like
Exactly.
all of this kind of thing is the layer of interaction, especially with multiplayer, but games in general, the layer of interaction that is above game knowledge and becomes, I'm going to use the term meta, but it's kind of an overused term, becomes the meta knowledge for a game
Meta
that I
being,
think is like meta being above.
For those who don't know, was it like most efficient tactic available? For those who don't know,
That is one definition. The way I use it also is meta in the sense of like addressing a general aggregate body of knowledge.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Got you. The other aspect is the like when those pros in Age of Empires go into team games and they pick certain civilizations to counter, like to balance each other out, but to also counter the other team, and like why they pick them and how they pick them. It's just,
yeah. Can I pick a super defensive civilization, build walls around my teammate, and allow him to never build military, just farm resources so we win?
exactly.
Like that's really cool.
And then they have to make sure that they actually get over to protect him fast enough, because if the other guy picks like a cavalry archer civilization and can go raid them, then it's not going to work. So all this balance and stuff, and some like we've been down this rabbit hole for a little while, but it's really cool to see the balance. And I wish, like, FIFA is the game that I'm kind of most into now. I wish they would do that. There's like a handful of ways that is way more likely to score than other ways. And it's kind of, it gets frustrating when you get up to like what's interesting with FIFA is once you get up to like the super high level, you play against everyone plays the same way and they just try and get the goals that are more likely to go in. But if you're like one level below that, then people just kind of play just for fun. And so I try and stay in like that level below that, because going up to the next one where everyone just plays the same way is it gets boring, honestly.
I am really glad you said that too, because that I just had another thought. This is something that I will, evangelize. I there are I've had a couple people now who are just adamantly believe in I'm starting to dislike this term, in the illusion of choice, and they will use that term with respect to their belief that there is a proper way to do something. So to your point, the idea that at the highest levels there is only one way to play because it is the most, with your definition,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
most effective tactic available. That is
yeah,
meta, is to play that way. And if you aren't playing that way, you're throwing, or you suck, or you are ignorant. Like there's only like this is the way that you have to play. And
hmm
I've heard that term thrown around, the illusion of choice, because they're saying, well, yeah, you can play another way, but you really can't because you want to win.
yeah,
And I think that I'm not disparaging that belief, because that's their belief about their relationship with the video game.
hmm
But at its core, in my opinion, games need to be fun.
hmm
And if I want to do something that's not the most effective tactic available, but I have fun with it, that is entirely valid.
oh,
And
for
it's not
sure.
it's not an illusion of choice. That is me interacting with the game in a way that I find fun, and it's no less valid than the meta tactic. And so there is an argument that at the highest levels you want to use the most effective tactic to get the wins. But
hmm
even then, I think that falls through. Like if you can be effective with something that's not precisely what everyone else is doing,
hmm
I don't think you should be flamed for that.
No, definitely not. I
So
don't think so either.
trying to balance, like, the idea that the top level players want, there is only one way to play versus, there are all these different ways to play that are fun, is something that's really interesting, and something that I love hearing about from different people. Because
hmm
yeah, some people just say, like, I just do whatever. Like, I do this, it's fun.
Yeah,
I never win, but it's fun. Like
yeah.
that's okay in my opinion.
I think esports has kind of made that sort of the illusion of choice kind of, it's made it more prevalent when you watch an esport and they all play the same way. You're like, well, you can only play that way if you want to win. It's like you said, it's like, if I'm having fun, who cares? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to try out this new player or this new champion or this new civilization. And if you lose with them a gazillion times in a row, then it might not be fun. But like
Right.
the first couple of times, like, you're trying different things, and like that's at the end of the day, like you said, the games are there for entertainment and for you to have fun. So it's a weird thing. It's been a big shift, I think, in the gaming sort of industry. And I was talking with Haber in an earlier episode. I think it was 16 about that. He's a big FIFA guy, and he was we were discussing that a little bit. But I want to jump back for you slightly uh, and get sort of how you got to where you are. So when you were at Georgia Tech, correct? And you were doing, I want to say, what, systems engineering? Is that accurate?
Yes. Yep. I graduated from Georgia Tech, um, and I started as an industrial and systems engineering major,
Mm-hmm.
and I found myself um, experiencing certain things that were making me unhappy. I was having I I guess this is going to sound a little conceited. I don't really like talking myself up, but
Mm-hmm.
for most of my life, I've done fairly well in school. I've
Oh, for sure. You killed it in high school.
um, and so like, oh, you're smart, or oh, like, oh yeah, A's are easy, whatever. Um, and I was a perfectionist to the point of detriment.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't do it perfectly, I had failed. And the way that I measured my self-worth was in success, specifically academic success.
Mm-hmm.
So having devoted everything about myself through like midway to the end of high school to doing well in school,
Mm-hmm.
that was wearying. It's tiring. Like,
Yeah.
so near the end of high school going into college, I found myself like, why am I even bothering? I care so much about this and it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a little bit more difficult for me to approach what I needed to do to succeed academically.
Sure.
I love systems. Everything's a system. Almost everything's a system. A lot of people don't realize that. Even like a fork, there was, is a system of a kind. It was designed in a certain way. It is used a certain way, the way you interact with it. So I really love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely, Georgia Tech has the best, or one of the best systems engineering programs in the country, has for over a decade. So I was really excited to get in. And then I found myself not enjoying it. It was a lot of math. I used to love math. I had a teacher in high school who,
Mr. White?
at AOS actually,
Oh, okay.
who kind of dampened that a little bit, made me feel dumb for not knowing something when I went up to the board.
I thought you were going to say that a teacher that made you like it.
No,
Mr. White
other way.
Mr. White made me like it.
I've heard good things about Mr. White.
Yeah.
I've never been in his class, but
not here to disparage his name at all. Anyways,
so I started not liking as much, and there was a lot of math in the ISYE program. It was very much it was a little bit too much supply chain and units, and I love the idea of efficiency, but I wasn't super interested in industrial efficiency or supply chain efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So that coupled with this kind of, I guess I would call it burnout, is that perfectionism turned to like, why do I put so much of my self-worth into this thing? It's taking so much energy. I knew that I needed to make a change. Mm-hmm. I needed to find something I was more passionate about because, and since then, since college, I've promised myself that if there's any way that I can help it, I will pursue things that I care about and that make me happy. I don't need to be happy every single day of my life. But if I know I'm in a position where I don't enjoy what I'm doing, then I need to consciously make a change because I refuse to live the way that I lived mentally at that point. Mm-hmm. So to that end, I knew I had always been passionate about systems. I had always loved video games, not only like playing them, but also how they're made and how people play them and how people interact with them, and the idea of like what information is presented, on the HUD, for example, and how people interact with that information. Mm-hmm. So I ended up switching majors, and I ultimately ended up graduating with a degree in a BS in literature, media, and communications with a focus in media and interaction design. And most people would go into graphic design or UI UX, user interface, user experience, or app development, stuff like that. I took as many classes as I could, relating to game development and game design, because I knew that I wanted to create something that gave other people the same feeling that I got when I played something and thought, wow, that's cool. Mm-hmm. Like, whoa, did you see the way that interacted with that other thing? Like, I want to create that. So that's what I ended up doing. I made that switch. It helped a little bit. It was still difficult for me. It was especially difficult to sleep. I had difficult falling asleep because I didn't want to wake up the next morning, not in a living and unliving way, but as soon as you fall asleep, it's the morning and you have to deal with that day and everything that's happening. Right. Yeah. So it was still a little bit difficult to do that, but I'm very proud that I found something that I was passionate about. For Hi-Rez in particular, I did not have the intention of working for Hi-Rez out of college at the time, but I knew that they were local, and I was one of the founding members and the founding president of Smite Club at Georgia Tech, which was one of the first collegiate groups linked to Hi-Rez Studios and Smite, which is, as we mentioned earlier, which is their MOBA. Mm-hmm. And through that, I was able to get in contact with the company to coordinate club activities. So we came and helped volunteer at the Xbox launch for Smite, for instance. There was a local mall that had this set up. We were there helping. And it was through that I learned that they had an internship program. So I applied to the internship program and was accepted as a QA analyst intern. And then did that for a summer. And then I had 1 semester left, but they had given me an offer for full-time after that last semester. And without having intentionally, like I didn't intend to use the club to get into Hi-Rez, but it was convenient that I was able to learn about the opportunities they had and then do well enough in the internship that I was able to join the company.
That's awesome. That's a really cool byproduct of something that you were passionate about kind of paying out in the end. And here you are now. You are a game, what would you say, game designer or game developer?
Game designer. I think that's actually something else that's interesting. So the idea of game developer versus non-game developer, a lot of people, there's a bit of a divide. Some people will adamantly say that game developer is a term only used for those in the technical side, only the programmers or the technical artists, or those are game developers. Whereas my viewpoint is that anyone who contributes to the success or health of a game is a game developer. That includes marketing, that includes community management, that includes myself. Game designers versus programmers versus artists, they're all game developers in my eyes. So, but my title is game designer. I do a lot of different things. There in other companies, especially larger companies, there may be like an AI designer or a quest designer who only do a specific subset of things. I do happen to be kind of I wear many hats within the idea of design. But yeah, game designer and developer.
Do you enjoy having your wearing multiple hats and kind of getting to touch a bunch of different things?
It is one of the most fun aspects of my position. It's another thing in college that I learned about myself is that I need new and different and engaging. I need to feel mentally stimulated. And so part of that for me is like, yeah, maybe I need to spend a couple days hooking up content, which is a little repetitive, but it's still something different. And the next day, one of my favorite aspects is writing voice packs. I will write voice packs for the skins that have voice lines. I will send out audition notes and receive auditions from voice actors, like legitimate paid voice actors. I will select the one I think is most appropriate for the role, and then I'll direct them in a session where they say the things that I wrote, and that becomes the personality of the skin. So that's awesome. That's fantastic, right? That's so much fun. So that might be one day, and the next day I'll be working on maybe a new champion if I'm on the schedule for working on the new champion, and the next day I'll work up a new design document for a system we want to overhaul or a new talent that we want to change or something like that. And yeah, the ability to do different and varied and interesting things, I think, is going to be necessary. Not only like, even if I no longer become a game designer or whatever, is going to be necessary for me in life. I've learned that.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like you mentioned in the bigger companies where they would only be like specialized in one thing. I feel like this is just from our conversations in the last couple of days, I feel like this is a good fit for you, at least for the time being, anyways. Where you can do a bunch of different things. Changing gears slightly, you also stream, correct?
I do.
You want to sort of talk about how you got into that and what games you stream and where we can find you?
Sure. Yeah. So streaming is the way I've described it to people is it is my first hobby, my first real hobby. Like I love. I used to read for pleasure. That's most of what I did through high school. Is actually I was that weird kid who just carried his book around and
no, you weren't weird.
Instead of talking to people, I would read instead. But I'd read. I would play soccer. I would play video games. But those were all pastimes. And this streaming for me has become my first. Like I'm going to intentionally work towards improving incrementally this, like the idea of a hobby or content creation. So very excited. It's something that I've always kind of wondered about. I've always kind of wanted to do. And it was, I think it was a year and a half ago, just about now, that I started on Twitch. I got a little bit of extra money saved up and I bought a webcam and a microphone. I didn't have the boom at this point, right? I had like a a mic stand that I purchased, and I just started streaming because it was something that I'm super interested in doing. And I was wondrously, I'll use the term blessed, I suppose, lucky, to have friends who were there since day one. I have one friend, shout out to Justin. Thank you for your support. Who always had me on a tab, even if he wasn't like actively chatting. He always had me on a tab, and just that one viewer helped me tremendously, because for a long time, if you're starting out without a base already, you will be streaming to nobody, and it feels so weird and so bad to just be to see that zero for hours and hours and hours. But since then, I average now just over 10 viewers per stream. I love the fact that they spend their time with me. I don't do it for donations or anything like that. And I play a variety of games. I guess I would be a variety streamer. I play whatever makes me happy, and I hope the people can join me for me and for our interaction versus like a particular game. Not that I'm disparaging people who have built their base on a specific game. So I go by Nico Ergo Sum on Twitch, NECOERGOSUM. I usually stream just on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the evenings, 7 to whenever I feel like getting off. And it's been so much fun because it allows me to interact with these people all over the world. I have a fan from Turkey who shows up often, and we get to chat, and it also allows me, like I said, to kind of incrementally progress. So I'm looking at, like, this is a fantastic microphone, the Blue Yeti, but I'm looking at getting like a Shure SM7B, which is an XLR mic, $400. And it's not like my audio quality is bad enough that I need it, but it's the idea that I get to invest in my hobby that's so fun for me. But no, I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like, well, we'll have to talk offline about that mic, because I might like, similarly to you, this is probably one of my first like big hobbies, and so that would probably be the first investment. But what was it? Like you were talking about your friend Justin, just having a tab open. I have a couple of friends who are also starting out in the stream, and I try to do the same, just have a tab open all the time. And I think for those listening who have friends that are trying to stream, it does more than you think it does just to have that tab open, even if you're not paying attention at all.
Such a huge difference. I highly encourage it. I am so thankful for the people who have done that for me.
Yeah, it makes, I mean, you heard it from Kevin first. Like he's had the experience of having that happen, but I can say from on the other side, just having friends text me, be like, "Hey man, thanks for having the tab open," and like I'll pop in every once in a while and say like, "Hey, what's up?" or maybe talk trash depending on how I'm feeling that day. But it's just like it's that support from your kind of like your circle. You want to see your friends do well, and it's so simple. Like it literally takes no effort just to open a tab and keep it open. But
it's very well said.
But enough of the soapbox. Streaming is super cool. I've thought like your sort of how you got into it is sort of similar to the podcast and how we got into that, but it's just a cool sort of way to interact with people, especially now when you can't go anywhere with COVID and stuff. You get to enjoy what you're doing, right? For you is playing video games. I know other people on Twitch probably think, I was looking around last weekend, just at all the different things that people do. Like people like cook on there, like people do art on there, like people do all sorts of things on there. And it's just like people, and you can just be you, and people will find you and hang out with you just because you are you. And that's a really cool and I think untapped sort of, I don't want to say market, but it's an untapped sort of, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of venue for interaction with people, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of tough to see sometimes, like, yeah, the numbers will go up and then they'll go down, and that means people left. But it's also okay, because you're just doing you, and you can't change you. And if they want to stick around and chat, then that's awesome. If not, then that's okay, because that's the beauty of the platform, right?
I think they've done a really good job allowing people who aren't like your big names to just be able to kind of do them without much. And I don't know, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no sort of like, it's similar to YouTube in the fact that you can just, as long as you're not doing anything like illegal, I don't think you don't have any restrictions on what you're doing, is there?
No, there are a couple of gates, like a couple of levels. So just anyone can stream if they have the software,
Mm-hmm.
and an account. And then once you hit affiliate, you get the ability to receive money.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll unlock a couple extra features, like the ability for your viewers to change the video quality.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you hit partner, it's even more stuff, a lot more support. But nothing prevents you, if you have the software and the inclination, to create an account and start streaming.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend it for those who are looking for sort of a hobby or?
I'll be honest. If it's just I'm looking for a hobby, I don't think I would recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a skill set, and I wouldn't. I'm definitely a very small streamer,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I have developed over time a better skill set when it comes to, because you are an entertainer to some degree. You do, to be successful, I think you need to interact at least a little bit with your audience. So learning to, every once in a while, take a look at that bottom left corner of your screen and look at the chat, maybe respond, is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And interacting with people, even if it is, it doesn't matter, they're online, it's whatever, it is still interacting with people. So if that is not your cup of tea, or you're not interested in kind of tackling the challenges that come with streaming, then I wouldn't recommend it just as an offhand hobby. But if you are
Mm-hmm.
interested in content creation and meeting other people and having fun and spending time with them online via your community, then I think it is a good option.
Do you remember Rooney? He was a freshman
Yeah,
when we were seniors.
I do.
He's the friend. He's one of the friends that I keep his tab open. He streams FIFA.
Nice.
And so he's kind of in the similar boat as you. But I think, was it a big learning curve for you to sort of, um, obviously you mentioned like you were the quiet kid who always had books. Was it a big adjustment for you to sort of become that entertainer a little bit?
I am still definitely an introvert. I'm definitely a mostly shy, quiet person, but I think it was actually college that helped me come out of my shell a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I had some experiences meeting people. I joined a fraternity, not a particularly fratty fraternity. It's kind of still a little nerdy, but I joined a fraternity, and that really helped me open up, just in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then that, coupled with the experiences in college, and then the professional experience I've had since then, and then my 1.5 years of streaming, has kind of culminated in, I feel a lot more comfortable just in general, and confident about myself than I used to. Which I think really helps a lot. So even if you don't like me as a viewer,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay, because I am doing my thing and I'm confident about it. And if you don't like me, then move on to the next one, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good outlook to have. I think probably on that note, we can wrap things up. What are you looking forward to in the future for yourself?
That's a
Got
good
any
question.
goals?
I think in the short term for work, I think 2021 is going to be a really awesome year for Paladins. So my work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've put out the two most recent champions.
Mm-hmm.
I was lead designer on them. I'm lead designer on the next champion coming out, and then I'm lead designer on the champion not after that, but the one after. So
Mm-hmm.
over the course of 1.5 years, I'll have put out 4 of the 5 champions, which is kind of cool.
For sure.
So I'm excited for that. I'm also excited, I think, to just keep learning. I think there are certain things about myself that I'd love to change or expand upon. And stuff that, I wish I had done this when I was 21 or 22. But even as I creep into my later 20s, I'm still really excited to kind of learn on a personal level. So just kind of, it's kind of cliche, but just working on myself and working on my skill set professionally, and working on the hobbies and the things that I enjoy. I'm really looking forward to, even with this kind of the negative side that we have right now with COVID and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Although hopefully we get out of that soon if the vaccines are good to go. But
yeah, we'll see.
Knock on wood. But it's been an hour and a half, Kevin. This time has flown by. I really appreciate your time. And maybe we'll be looking forward to having you back on once you get those new champions released. And yeah, and we'll put your Twitch link in the description.
Sure. Yeah, we can do Twitter, Twitch, all that good
Yeah,
stuff.
and everybody go give him a follow. Click the links below, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Eric. Take care, guys.